25 stylish, and surprising, cars called GT. Great Grand Tourers. GT, two letters that mean so much in the car industry. The badge is primarily used to designate a Grand Tourer, but has been put to good use on mildly warm hatches or for when a GTI badge would promise something a car might not be able to deliver. The Mini 1275 GT was a real-world GT, but it's not the only one. So, I trawled the archives in search of other famous GT cars. Note, this is not an exhaustive list and I've steered clear of badge extensions. Meaning you won't find a GTR, GTI, GTS or GTE here. Citroën AXE GT. The Citroën AXE GT is unlikely to win a game of top trumps. Unless the chosen category is lightness, or risk of death in the event of an accident. But that doesn't mean it's not fit to wear the GT badge. Because the Featherlight Citroën was one of the most exciting cars of the late 80s and early 90s. Power was sourced from a 1.4-liter engine developing just 86 horsepower. But it was mated to a body that tipped the scales at a mere 722 kilograms. It meant that the AXE GT could punch well beyond its weight. Especially on a twisty B road, where it could hold its own against more illustrious competition. Bentley Continental GT. It's not often that you'll find a Citroën AXE appearing alongside a Bentley Continental. But as they share the GT badge, I'll crack on with the most unlikely pairing since Danny DeVito and Arnold Schwarzenegger. The Continental GT was the first Bentley to be built following the Volkswagen takeover in 1998, and it shares its platform with the Phaeton. After an 8-year production run, it was replaced by the second-generation model in 2011 and has become a favorite of Premier League footballists. Vauxhall Viva GT. Back in the day, the recipe for a performance car was simple: just add a larger engine. The Vauxhall Viva may have been an unlikely starting point for a go-faster saloon. But a twin-carb 2.0-liter engine gave it a fighting chance of keeping up with a Lotus Cortina. An optional matte black bonnet and a pair of bonnet scoops delivered instant high-street appeal. While a 100 miles per hour top speed lifted the GT beyond the realms of the 1.2 and 1.6-liter Vivas driven by your dad. Mini 1275 GT. The 1275 GT was the Mini Cooper for the 1970s. But it lacked the character and flair of its more illustrious predecessor. Introduced in 1969, the 1275 GT was designed to be cheaper and easier to build. The result of cost-cutting at British Leyland. The 1275cc single-carb engine produced just 54 horsepower and delivered a top speed of 85 miles per hour. Side stripes cannot be removed, but in other respects the car is just a Mini Clubman with a bigger engine. Ford Mustang GT. Ford has a rich history of GT vehicles, dating back to 1964 and the Grand Touring 40 inches. More commonly known as the GT40. It was only natural that the flagship Mustang would be known as the Mustang GT. Today is no different, with the GT badge serving to distinguish the 5.0-liter V8 from the less well-endowed 2.3-liter EcoBoost. Ferrari 456 GT. The GT badge is part of the furniture at Maranello, albeit more commonly with the addition of an extra letter. The 250 GTO, F355 GTS and 348 GTB are just three examples. The 456 GT saw Ferrari return to the front-engine layout for the first time since the 365 GTB4 of 1968 and was, perhaps, one of the greatest Grand Tourers of the 1990s. A 2+2 coupe with the beating heart of a 5.4-liter 12-cylinder engine isn't a bad form of transport for crossing a continent or two. Jensen GT. The Jensen GT was a last-ditch effort to save the ailing Jensen motors. But the shooting brake, think Volvo 1800S and Scimitar GTE, failed to save the company. A case of too little, too late. The GT was born out of the Jensen Healey convertible and powered by a Lotus twin-cam engine. It should have sold well, but the world was waiting for 1982 and the arrival of the Lynx Aventa. Probably. Austin 1300 GT. The 1300 GT was a go-faster version of the humble Austin Morris 1300. which, at the time, was Britain's best-selling car. It's the first ever GT with front-wheel drive, transverse engine and hydroelastic suspension. Proclaimed Austin Morris in 1969. And it packed quite a punch. Twin carburetors, alloy steering wheel, black, race style, upholstery. Front disc brakes, big bore silencer and lowered suspension were just part of its armory. Top speed was a dizzying 96 miles per hour. Ford Escort GT. Search for Ford Escort GT online and you'll find one of two variants. Allow the truth about cars to introduce the North American version. The early 90s Escort GT was a decently fast car for its day. But Escorts were always such disposable cars that you seldom see any of these semi-goofy looking GTs these days. More familiar to European motorists will be the Mk1 Escort 1300 GT, which used a highly tuned version of Ford's familiar 1.3-litre engine. Ferrari 250 GT. Ferrari's use of the GT badge dates back to the 250 Europa GT of 1954. The first in a series of 250 GTs of various bodies and finishes. These were the cars for the super-rich and the motoring elite, driven by film stars and genuine A-listers. Pictured is a 1961 Ferrari 250 GT SWB California Spider. Formerly the property of James Coburn and Chris Evans. Not one, but two 250 GT SWB California Spiders appear in the top 10 most expensive cars sold at auction. Opel GT. Only flying is better, proclaimed Opel when it launched the achingly beautiful GT. That it looked like a European Corvette was no accident. Because the styling of contemporary Opel cars was heavily influenced by its American owners. Underneath the GT you'd find the floor pan of a humble Kadett. While the fastback coupe body was built in France. The rotating headlights are superb, but although more than 100,000 GTs were built, none were right-hand drive. Shame. Porsche Carrera GT. When production of the Carrera GT ceased in 2006, Porsche concluded, with a certain degree of bravado, that it was the most successful supercar in history. Its point was that, at 1,270 units, more Carrera GTs rolled out of the Leipzig production facility than the McLaren F1, Ferrari Enzo and Pagani Zonda combined. Okay, so 605 horsepower and a 0 to 62 miles per hour time of 3.9 seconds. Might not seem like a big deal in an age of the Dodge Demon. But it was the way in which the Carrera GT went about its business that made the difference. The race-honed V10 engine makes a noise rivaled only by Thor gargling on a single malt scotch. Lamborghini 350 GT. For Lamborghini, this was where it all began. The 350 GT was an evolution of the earlier 350 GTV, and was the first Lamborghini to be mass-produced. If Ferruccio Lamborghini's sole aim was to stick a metaphorical two fingers up at Ferrari, he well and truly succeeded. Carrozzeria Touring built 120 units, the majority of which were powered by a 3.5-litre 12-cylinder engine. Two Spider versions were also built by the famous Italian coach builder. A 400 GT followed in 1966 and was the first proper 2+2 4-seat Lamborghini. Maserati 3200 GT. The 3500 GT of 1957 was Maserati's first successful attempt at building a genuine Grand Tourer, and was itself a replacement for the A6G 54 GT or A6 2000 Gran Turismo of 1954. More familiar will be the 3200 GT, introduced in 1998. It used a 3.2-litre V8 engine to provide a top speed of 174 miles per hour. And a 0 to 62 miles per hour time of 5.1 seconds. From a styling perspective, the boomerang rear lights were a standout feature. Aston Martin DB4 GT. At its launch in 1959, the Aston Martin DB4 GT was Britain's fastest passenger sports cars. But this car was more than just a bold claim to drop into conversation at the gentleman's club. It was shorter, lighter and more powerful than the standard DB4. And was introduced in the same year Aston Martin won the Le Mans 24 Hours. A total of 75 DB4 GTs were built between 1959 and 1963. including 8 lightweight models. Toyota 2000 GT. Is this the most beautiful car to emerge from Japan? You'd struggle to find anything better than the Toyota 2000 GT, which was completed in prototype form by Yamaha in 1965. With Japan's wealthy elite quick to open their wallets, Toyota got involved with the next stage of development. Yamaha was entrusted to tackle the production, with the first of these hand-built supercars arriving in 1967. 2 open-top versions were created for use in the Bond movie, You Only Live Twice. MGB GT. The MGB was launched in 1962, but the Pininfarina-penned GT Fastback wouldn't arrive in 1965. It retained all of the handling characteristics of the Roadster, with a raised windscreen height ensuring there was ample room in the cabin, at least in the front. The MGB GT V8 arrived in 1973, right in the midst of the energy crisis. Timing is everything. Aston Martin DB9 GT. The most elegant expression of a sports grand tourer, its DNA echoing the iconic DB GT models of its lineage, is how Aston Martin introduces the DB9 GT. Power is sourced from a 6.0-litre V12 engine, which delivers 540 horsepower. The DB9 dates back to the 2003 Frankfurt Motor Show, with the GT seen as a swan song before it made way for the DB11. The DB9 GT Bond Edition was launched to mark the release of Spectre. Mercedes-AMG GT. In the case of the Ford GT, if you're not one of the lucky few chosen to take delivery of the supercar, you're out of luck. So while we were able to find a Porsche Carrera GT for sale on AutoTrader for £750,000, and a Mercedes-AMG GT for as little as £85,000, you won't find a 2017 Ford GT, yet. The Mercedes-AMG GT was unveiled in 2014 and was Affalterbach's attempt to take a slice of the pie dominated by the Porsche 911. Today, the range has grown to include a Roadster and the hardcore GTR. Volvo 242 GT. This very special Volvo includes a fuel-injected overhead cam engine, tuned suspension, alloy wheels, 4 on the floor with overdrive and other features you associate with fine performance. With a promise like that, how could anyone resist the 242 GT? If it had wings it'd fly, proclaimed Volvo, in a headline that whiffed of a certain other Swedish carmaker. The 242 GT took Volvo down a new path, with a bespoke grille, round headlights, front spoiler and alloy wheels providing the clues to its sporting intent. Jaguar XKR GT. How do you shift an aging product when you've just launched a shiny new model? That was the problem facing Jaguar when it launched the F-Type, but had a few unsold XKRs lying around the factory. Which is why the £135,000 when new Jaguar XKRs GT exists. Only 10 of these 5.0-litre V8 supercharged runout specials were built for the UK market. Each one 145 kilograms lighter than the standard XKRs. Fiat Punto GT. The Fiat Punto GT may have lacked the handling prowess of many of its rivals, but it had an ace card up its sleeve. The 1.4-litre turbocharged unit was a development of the old Uno turbo engine, and ensured this feisty Fiat could punch well above its weight. The 0 to 60 miles per hour time of 8.2 seconds was a revelation, certainly at this price point, which makes the lackluster chassis all the more disappointing. Catch one if you can, because there are just 71 taxed and tested on Britain's roads. Audi Coupe GT. The common or garden Audi Coupe arrived 6 months after the launch of the iconic Quattro and offered some of the styling for much less cash. Okay, so the wide arches and barnstorming performance were absent. But the Coupe managed to cut a mean figure on the Audi forecourts of the land. Alfa Romeo GT. It's a modern Alfa Romeo, so you know you'll have to make 1 or 2 sacrifices in order to live with the GT. But it'd be worth it just to stare at it on your driveway. When powered by the 3.2-litre V6 engine, the Alfa GT is more than capable of living up to the promise of both badges. A proper Alfa and a proper GT. Renault 5 GT Turbo. The Renault 5 GT Turbo was a true hot hatch hero of the 1980s. able to hold its own against the might of the 205 GTI and Golf GTI. Key to its brilliance, aside from the turbocharged engine, was its lightness. With the GT Turbo tipping the scales at just 850 kilograms. Today, Renault uses the GT badge to denote its flagship models, as demonstrated by the Megane and Twingo. In truth, they can't hold a candle to the French GTs of yesteryear.
Well, that's all, folks.
That's my line.
Step aside, babe. Let a star do this. That's all!
That's all, folks!